Hello and welcome to Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, I'm Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to Endgame of Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War. We have done it, we've completed our first game, and I'm very excited. At the end, we're going to talk about what comes next. I've mentioned a few things that we're going to do, but I'll clarify there just to make sure we're all on the same page. But before that, we're going to talk about our chapter. But before that, we're going to talk about some ideas that I've had and that I've gotten from other people about what to put at this beginning segment. Because I've talked about how I really want to put something here that I can talk about so it's not just getting into the chapter every time. So I thought about it and I asked other people their opinions. And I've come away with two ideas. And I could add to this or change it. I'm testing the waters to see how well this works out. Might not work out well at all. I might change some stuff about it. I don't know. How it's going to go down is that every episode, I'm going to give you guys a question that I'm going to want you to answer. And you can give your answers by emailing me at turnwheelpodcast@gmail.com, all one word. I'll put that in the episode description. I'll just start putting them in all the episode descriptions probably. And also, I'm going to create a Twitter that you guys can tweet at if that's more convenient for you. I know that a lot of people don't really use email very much. So, by the time that this episode goes up, I will have made that, and I will put that in the episode description as well. I don't know what it's going to be yet, but I will try to get a tag that's easy to remember. I can't imagine that there are too many that I would pick that would already be taken, but check the episode description and tweet your answers there. And hopefully we get enough engagement where I can spend some time talking about that. Also, probably every few episodes, because I don't anticipate getting enough to do this every single episode, so probably like every 3 or 4 episodes, I'm going to take questions that you guys give me and answer them on the podcast as well. So that's your call to action. Go and go tweet or email your answers to me, and also tweet and email any questions that you have for me to answer, and hopefully within the next few episodes, I will answer those as well. So for this episode, I'm going to keep it simple. It's the first one, and we just finished genealogy, so I'm going to keep it straightforward and to the point. Who is your favorite character in Genealogy of the Holy War, and why? What reasons do you have? So go ahead and give me your answers, and if I get enough, or if I get even just one or two interesting ones that have enough to chew on, I will talk about those at the beginning of the next episode. So with that out of the way, make sure you check the episode description to see where you can reach out and contact me. But without further ado, I think that we can get into our last chapter, Endgame, which is called The Final Holy War. Seliph has made it to Chalfie, which is his first step into the country of Granvale, where his final challenge awaits him. His victories across the continent have inspired rebellions in places where he hasn't even been. Specifically, Augustria and Seliph are waging wars to free themselves. And with that in mind, Seliph marches into Granvale, knowing that the end is drawing near. He's going to face a lot of obstacles, including Edda, Dozel, Frege, Veltomer, and Belhala. None of those, you don't have the context for any of those, I assume. Edda is where Claude is from. Dozel is where Lex is from, and also Yohavier. Frege is where Tiltu and her kids are from. Velthomer is, of course, Arvis's homeland and Azel's. And then Belhala is the capital. And we don't really know anyone, because usually there are some bosses that return. The only one this time around, I mean, I guess there are a few actually, but the only one that's outlined here at the beginning is Hilda. The opening narration also calls out a group of enemies called the 12 Dead Lords. This is their first mention, and the Dead Lords, we'll talk more about them later, but they're very enigmatic. I think the opening narration even calls them enigmatic, which they are. They're very mysterious and not well defined, but they're kind of cool. Again, more on them later, though. It's been a year since or over a year since Seliph's battle in Isaac, and now it's time for the final holy war to begin. And that is how the intro narration ends. We cut to Julius and Manfroy discussing how Arvis has died. Julius seems to have no remorse over this whatsoever, which at this point is unsurprising. Manfroy says something interesting in regards to Arvis. He says, "The righteous heart of the Crusader Vala burned too fiercely within him," and goes on to say that he would have betrayed him eventually. Arvis would have betrayed Julius eventually anyway. And Julius seems to agree. Now, this is kind of fascinating to me, and it's entirely possible that he's speaking metaphorically. People say stuff like this all the time. It's like, "Oh, you have your father's spirit or whatever," when talking about people inheriting traits from others. But there is a pattern you can pick up, if you look at the inheritors of major holy blood throughout the series, a lot of them, or throughout the game, I should say, a lot of them have traits in common with each other, and by extension, kind of implied in common with the original Crusaders. So, for instance, Forseti is described as being very free spirited, being very go with the flow, very laid back. He's more kind of the love, peace, and chicken grease kind of force in the world. And you look at those traits compared to Lewin, and they're very similar. Even in Generation 1. Generation 2 is its own can of worms, which we'll talk about later, but even in Gen 1, he displayed a lot of those traits as well. And you can track this, for other characters as well. I mean, Julius is the obvious example, right? Once the blood of Loptir within him activated and kind of awakened, he turned into a ruthless monster. But even someone like, Deirdre and Julia act pretty similarly to how we find Naga to act in later games, very reserved, quiet, but fighting ultimately on the side of justice. Things like that. And it's possible that this is all just symbolic and all just kind of, subtextual, like it's not meant to be taken literally, that the Crusaders' the Crusaders' bloodline have an influence on the personalities of the people who come down, down their lineage. But it's something to think about. I mean, even if it is symbolic, I think it's still cool and fun. It gives you a good way to kind of picture what the Crusaders of the original Holy War must have been like. They then bring in Julia, who spends a little bit of time talking with them. She describes the night that Julius kind of turned evil and says that Manfroy came with some dark tome and gave it to Julius, at which point he basically became a whole different person. Apparently, he used to be a kind and loving person, and whatever Manfroy did to him completely upturned that and made him into a horrible, horrible person. This is our introduction to the evil plot MacGuffin. Is one of these in almost every Fire Emblem game, I think, whether it's the Dark Sphere, or the Fire Emblem in FE8. The Stone of Grotto, Laron's Medallion in the Tellius games. The bad guy item that makes bad guy, or whatever. I don't have a problem with these necessarily, especially since not even every game has them. It's not even something that happens all the time. It's just pretty common. But it's funny to see that here it's not even really like it doesn't even play a pivotal role in the story. I mean it does in the sense of like it's directly responsible for what happened, but it's not really important anymore. It's just kind of mentioned in passing, unlike the Dark Sphere, which they have to like plan around that and create countermeasures for it and everything like that. Here it's just kind of dropped and not brought up again, which is fine. It doesn't have to be a central part of the story. At this point, Julius tells Manfroy to kill Julia since she's the only one who can possibly be a threat to him. Manfroy, however, wants to spare her and says that he can make her work for him and Julius. And Julius kind of thinks that this would be funny and epic and ironic, so he says, "Yeah, go for it. Do whatever you want." He warns him to be careful, though. He's like, one mistake could cost us dearly, and this is ultimately what causes the downfall of their entire plan. I'm spoiling things a little bit here, but basically, by the end of this map, you get Julia back, and she's able to defeat Julius. I mean, presumably, you can kill her, or you can just kill Julius without using her. It's difficult, very, very difficult, but you can do it. Most people aren't going to, and so for the most part, that's what happens. You know, Julia comes around and is able to defeat Julius, and it's really people criticize this part a lot. I don't necessarily have a problem with, it's a very classic tale, the bad guy lets their own hubris get the better of them and it results in their downfall. That's fine. That's a story as old as time and I'm cool with it. It just feels very forced here. It doesn't feel like in character. I mean, honestly, not even necessarily out of character. It's just that Julius and Manfroy are both so like boring blank slate characters that have had like no screen time up to this point, and we really don't know anything about either of them. Julius, I guess, he has a very sadistic side to him. Manfroy has been very to the point. He doesn't really want people to suffer necessarily. Like he doesn't get anything out of it. He just wants the Loptier Empire to come back into power and will do anything to make that happen. Julius, on the other hand, seems to like making people suffer. And so for that reason, I think I could get behind it here if he just explained it a little bit differently. It's not that he wants her to like have to fight her friends or fight him, like do his bidding and that'll make her suffer. He kind of just likes the irony of making his mortal enemy work for him, which isn't a bad angle, but it just doesn't feel right. Like I think if they just shifted a little bit and made it more about him trying to inflict suffering on her, then that would have been fine. But instead, they kind of take it in this other direction, and it just doesn't seem to really line up with what we know about Manfroy and Julius. I don't know. I'm nitpicking, but I mean, it's not really nitpicking though, is it? Because this is the entire reason that they lose. Like this is the moment where they seal their own fates. If they just killed Julia here, then they would have basically won. I mean, technically, you can beat them, but I don't know. I mean, I think maybe if there's a few things you could have done here. I think maybe having Manfroy want to kill her, having it be reversed basically, like Manfroy wants to kill her, but Julius is like, no, just let her live and have her fight against our enemies. That could have been maybe better because then Manfroy would still be in character. Maybe have Manfroy try to kill her, but it just doesn't work. Maybe she's like is holding on and she shows up somewhere with 1 HP or something like that. That could have been cool. I don't know. It's just it feels like if they wanted to do this, there's a bunch of different ways they could have done it better. But I don't know. This is fine. It's like not bad or anything. Like I said, at worst it's just kind of like, okay, yeah, I've seen this before. But it could have been a really fun and characterful moment. I think also one read that you could make here is that maybe this is like a little bit of who Julius used to be shining through and he wants to let her live out of maybe even like a subconscious desire to not kill his own sister. The problem with that read is that this would be if that is what it is the only time anything like that happens. He never has any other moments of lucidity where he's able to shake off Loptier's influence. Not even, if there had been a moment where he like kind of seems sad that his dad died or something like that. I guess he does have some human moments with Ishtar, but that's really all we get, and it's kind of vague as to what's going on there. That's possible actually because I'll get more into some stuff later, but we do see him interact with Ishtar again, and there's some stuff there that makes me think that maybe he's not as ruthless as he maybe lets on. So it's possible. I think that that's probably the best read you can give, even if it's a little bit unlikely. Is that Julius is still in there somewhere, and he just doesn't want to kill his sister, and is kind of hiding that under the guise of, "Mwahaha, yes, we'll do the evil bad guy thing and make her fight for us or something." Although, actually, no, that doesn't work because it's Manfroy's idea. Manfroy suggests it, and Julius just agrees with it. So no, I don't think this really works no matter how you slice it. I think it's just kind of whatever, and that's a shame because I think that that's such a weak way to beat a villain who is. I mean, honestly, Julius and Manfroy have been pretty forgettable villains the whole time. But I think this could have been a good moment to like really characterize them and set them apart as like interest, like the only time they could have made the villains interesting really is in this moment if they had acted a little bit more in character. As it stands, it just kind of feels weird and awkward. After this, we see Seliph and Lewin preparing for the final battle. Lewin has decided that it is time to explain to Seliph exactly what's going on with Julius, or at least the most part. Lewin describes what they're doing as a holy war, which kind of confuses Seliph because he doesn't really understand. He thinks he's just overthrowing a corrupt empire. But Lewin explains that Julius is a descendant of Loptir's bloodline, is kind of working to revive the Dark Empire. He's been spending a decade trying to figure out the big picture here, is what he says. He gives a big backstory dump on how exactly the Loptir Empire was established the first time. The original Loptir Emperor Gale went on a journey in order to drink the blood of a legendary beast, is Lewin's description. And it seems like he might have succeeded. No one really knows because when he came back, he had really strange and mysterious powers and started to form the Empire. Later on, we find out that the gods, quote unquote, that gave the original Crusaders power were dragons. So it's possible that what Gale was trying to do is find a dragon and drink its blood. Whether he succeeded or not is debatable because, I mean, he did obviously come back possessed by Loptir, but I don't know if that was, if that was him having drank Loptir's blood or if he was just taken over or whatever. But he did something because when he came back, he was able to start the empire. Oh, he does. Okay, so here he does say that Lewin does say that Lobtier was a dragon. Seliph asks about the Crusaders and how they fit into the picture, but Lewin says that that'll have to wait because they have to move on and attack the enemy. This is just an excuse to have the lore dump kind of spread out across the chapter instead of having it all here at the beginning. But regardless, it is time to start the actual gameplay of the map. And as with last time, we are going to. Actually, you know what? I think we're going to do the conversations at the beginning this time. There are a lot. Just like in Chapter 5, there are a bunch of conversations based on characters who are married. And you know what? Let me pull up my Gen 2 pairings. It doesn't really matter because obviously there's no Gen 3, but this will give you some context as to which conversations I actually got. So Seliph is with Tinny, Shannon is with Patty, or Daisy, I should say. Ulster is with Lana, Leaf ended up with Nana, Yohavir ended up with Larse, and Ares is with Layla. So I didn't get all these conversations. Obviously, you can't get all of them, but even all the ones that I can get in one playthrough, I did not get. Tinny and Arthur have a conversation, as do their substitutes, just about how they're getting close to Frege and how they were, Tinny or Linda was taken away at a very young age, and how Arthur slash Ahmed hates Frege for that. The Arthur and Tinny one talks about Hilda a little bit and how much Tinny hates her. Stuff like that. It's a good conversation. I'm not reading all of these because some of them are pretty boring and forgettable, but I like the idea of Tinny marrying Leaf because in their conversation she talks about how much she wants to go back to Ulster, whereas if she gets married to, well, I mean, if she doesn't get married at all, or if she gets married to Seliph, she ends up going back to Frege, which is kind of interesting and kind of poetic in its own way. But she seems so happy about the idea of being able to go back and help all the people who she grew up with, and the people who actually treated her well. But the idea of her going back to Frege honestly isn't bad either. I really like all of Patty's conversations because she just makes lunch for the recipient, which is cute. Gives them all stat boosts too, max HP plus 3 and speed plus 3. Tinny's conversations with her husbands all give them plus 3 magic. Daisy and Dimna have a conversation here. Dimna, if you don't recall, is, I believe, Lester's substitute. He and Daisy just talk about how much they suck and how much no one needs them. And they're going to go back to Isaac where he's going to get a real job, is what he says, which I think is hysterical. Leaf and Jian actually have a similar conversation where he wants her to leave because she doesn't have holy blood and shouldn't be fighting. People just tend to not think highly of people who don't have holy blood here, I guess. Mana and Asalo actually have a similar conversation. Mana is Lana's substitute. Only instead of kind of being all defeatist about it and saying that they're just going to leave, Asalo gets frustrated and says that he wishes he had holy blood so he could tear up the battlefield. And Mana tries to cheer him up by reminding him of the orphanage kids who are back home waiting for him. It's cute. Oh no. Oh god. I just read the Nana and Ares conversation. I don't know if this is. Oh man. This flips the script on a lot of stuff, doesn't it? Shit. Okay. Hmm. So according to this, here, I'll just read this out loud and you guys can take what you will away from it. I should mention I do not know if this is in the original Japanese script or if this is a liberty taken by the translator. I'm going to assume that it is what is really written in the script, but I could be wrong about that. I'll just go ahead and read it. Ares, take it easy out here. You still have a monumental task awaiting you. I haven't forgotten, believe me. I have no intention of dying in this war. I will not rest until Augustria has attained the glory my father envisioned for it. I know you can do it, Ares. Your father would be so proud of you. But I can't do it alone, Nana. I need you. Of course, Ares. My life is yours. I'm not making the same mistake my mother did. And then Ares says, What? His own sister fell in love with him? Yes, she did, but it's not all that strange, really. They had different mothers. Hey, that reminds me. You and I are cousins, aren't we? Yeah, that's right. And then that's the end of the conversation. And I'm losing my fucking mind. How did I never know that this conversation existed? Jesus Christ, there's a lot to unpack here. Oh man. All this time I've been like, yeah, I mean, there's some questionable stuff in here, but it's all mostly fine. You know, like it's all stuff that like can either happen by accident or is in the story condemned as being bad. And the closest that you ever get to like a real incestuous pairing that is intended to be possible and is not condemned like actively in the writing is Nana and Ares. They can get married, and I've always just assumed that the game never broached the topic, or if they did, they at least like said something about it that was more interesting than, or more, I guess, contemplative than, yeah, huh, we're cousins, aren't we? That's pretty fucked up. And then, of course, there's a bit about Nana confirming that Lachesis fell in love with Eldegon, which I know I mentioned in chapter 2 was a meme, but I didn't think it was ever confirmed anywhere. I mean, the implications were there, right? Like it was definitely meant to be subtextually like is she in love with him? Is she not? You know, it's kind of up in the air. But here it just outright confirms it, which makes me feel like maybe this isn't the direct translation because otherwise people would be bringing this up way more often, I feel like. But yeah, I mean, it's right there in black and white. I guess she did fall in love with Eldegon, and that's pretty fucking weird, especially since the game tries to explain about like, oh no, there were only half siblings, which is the same logic that the game uses to like not have Seliph and Julia marry each other. Oh boy. Shit. Okay, well, I don't really know what else to say about this other than this is fucking weird and gross and I don't like it. I know I have some respect for the idea of like it's the Middle Ages, so Kaga wanted to portray like realistic middle age marriage politics. Now, obviously, that's not. This isn't like realistic middle age marriage politics because the women aren't being like married off to people for political gain or anything like that. So it's only realistic in the sense of like yes, people who were related to each other did get married in the Middle Ages. Like that is a fact. That is true, and Kaga did has gone on record saying that that is why he made it possible in these games or in this game, I suppose. But I never expected them to look directly into the camera and they say, "Yeah, it's not that weird. Incest is fine. Just don't worry about it." I don't know. This is pretty fucking weird, dude. I'm just gonna leave it there and not touch it with a 10-foot pole again. You guys can go ahead and take what you will from this conversation, but I am staggered by this. You guys are hearing my live reactions. Usually I read the conversations before I record, but I forgot to this time. So, or at least I skimmed them. I usually have to go back and refresh my memory. But yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that. That's pretty fucked up. Whatever though. Lana and Ulster have a conversation that honestly feels like it was pulled straight out of chapter 5. It has her very meekly and somberly saying like, "Hey, I'm very proud of you. I love you. Please don't die on me. I just want to be with you, okay?" And he takes a moment to be like, "Yeah, don't worry. I'm not going to leave you. I don't know where this is coming from, but we're going to be together." And that feels like, in chapter 5 all those people were getting bad vibes, and characters like Dew and Jamk had conversations where they were like making like airing out some of their unspoken feelings, and I feel like this has that kind of vibe. Like, this feels like something that, Lana's getting some premonitions that maybe they're all going to die, and she wants to get out some last words to her husband. Of course that's not what happens, but I don't know, it gives me that impression. I have to wonder because I mean the battle of Valhalla is has got to be common knowledge, especially since Aideen is alive and raised Lana in Isaac. So I'm sure that she mentioned it. So Lana knows what happened at the Battle of Valhalla, and I have to wonder if maybe there's some tension, not just with her, but maybe some other people who are being like, yeah, the last time this happened, the last time there was a big battle at Valhalla led by the descendant of Baldur, everyone got killed. And that's an interesting topic. I would have loved for them to explore that a little bit more explicitly. I don't think that that's the intended read. I think it's just trying to portray Lana as being, uwu cute, adorable little, healer girl. But that's a really fascinating idea, and I wish that they had made that explicit. Oh, she also has the same conversation with Fevale, for what that's worth. A few of these actually bring up people being scared. I mean, it's like a big battle, so I guess like dying is always a possibility. But that's I think that's going to be my read on this, is that they're all kind of nervous because of what happened to Sigurd and worried that maybe the same thing could happen again. Lana also has a cute conversation with Seliph that I should mention about how just it's similar to some stuff we saw in Gen 1 between like Aideen and Midir, like how, they've always loved each other. They've always had feelings for each other and just haven't had the courage to admit it to each other. Lana actually puts an interesting spin on hers by saying that she's feels bad about what she's doing to Julia, which I think has some odd implications. I mean, at this point, Seliph does not know that they are related, but it's kind of ambiguous, like how they feel about each other in the story. I mean, mechanically, like if we take the game mechanics to be literal, they were like really, really fond of each other when they first met. Seliph and Julia, that is. So they were like they almost like fell in love with each other. It was almost a Sigurd and Deirdre situation where they fell in love at first sight, pretty much. But over time, they kind of lost that spark, whereas Seliph and or Sigurd and Deirdre acted on theirs immediately. So I have to wonder, like, is there still some unresolved romantic feelings there? Does Julia have feelings for him? Does Seliph still have feelings for her? Is Lana picking up on that? Lana has a moment with Julia in chapter 6 where she kind of like says like, "Hey, I'll be there for you if if you need someone, you have me," stuff like that, just trying to make her feel comfortable in her new situation, considering she doesn't know anybody, doesn't have any memory. She's very scared and probably feels pretty isolated. So from that, you can infer like maybe they were close, maybe they talked to each other. Could Julia have said to her like, "Hey, I think I might have feelings for for Seliph, and then if Lana ends up marrying him, that's an interesting. It could be like you could make a whole story out of that love triangle. I think that that's really fun. I'm going wild with these. I'm reading into things to such a crazy extent. And the problem is that with Fire Emblem is that you kind of need to do that, especially in these early games. There's just no there's so little text that there's not even any room for anything to be subtextual, right? So if you want anything outside of the just straight up explicit read of what they're saying, then you kind of have to make some leaps in judgment and jump to some conclusions that you might not otherwise jump to. At least that's how I feel. I don't know. So I just read the Larce and Shannon conversation, and it's not particularly interesting, other than the fact that they are also cousins. And for this one, for whatever reason, the writers had the I guess the decency to not. I'm not trying to be a prude or whatever, right? Like I again in this cultural context, I think it's like okay, I guess, but it's just weird when they draw attention to it, and they did not here. So that's what I'm trying to say. I think that if Ares and Nana had just had like a normal, unremarkable lover conversation, I would have just completely moved on and not thought twice about it. But the fact that they were like, yeah, I just remembered, we're cousins, aren't we? Yeah, that's pretty weird. Oh well. But they don't do it here, so that's good. Now, okay, so this one's a little bit iffier. Fee and Oifi have a lover conversation, and now my immediate reaction is that the age gap is a little weird. But other than that, I actually think that this is a really, really cool pairing because Fee canonically is Lewin's kid. She's the only one where you can say definitively, yes, this is canon, at least in the version of events that we see play out in Thracia. Fee is Lewin's kid. So from her perspective, Lewin abandoned her, then her mom died. So Oifi being this kind of window into the past and into this life that her parents led because Oifi was there the whole time. You know, he presumably knew Aaron and Lewin pretty well, and their lover conversation here makes mention of that. She says, I feel I've gotten to know my parents better recently, like the kind of lives they lived. All the talks we've had together have really helped clear up my past, Oifi. So that's just sweet, you know, like this idea that through him she's bridging this connection that she never got to have with her parents. It's pretty fucking weird that they're like in a romantic relationship. I would have loved to see this be more of like a, you know, she kind of forms a platonic sort of father figure attachment to him, kind of like Seliph did, but the fact that they don't have non-romantic supports in this game. Well, they don't have supports at all. But I would have liked to just have this be like a conversation, just like a regular old conversation. Maybe one that gives them love points, but not necessarily one locked behind them being married to each other, because that's a little odd. Especially since they immediately say, Fee says, "I still have so much to learn from you, Oifi. I want to be more grown up." And then Oifi says, "There's no need to rush yourself, Fee. That'll happen in good time." And then Fee says, "Oifi, you gotta let me catch up before you get all old on me." So they're drawing attention to the age gap here. I don't necessarily think that like there's anything wrong with having an age gap, even like a pretty big one. I think that that's like I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Sometimes you just you can't pick who you fall in love with. It's a big one though, especially since she's not even 18. She's like 16 in the story, and then Oifi is, I believe, 30. I think we actually know explicitly he is 33-ish because he was 14 at the start of Gen 1, and then about 3 years passed, so he's probably 17 by the end of Gen 1, and then another 17 years passed. So he's 34. So 35, I guess, by now. And then Fee is probably about 16, 17. So it's a pretty hefty age gap. If this was like, she was 20 and he was 40, still a little odd, but I could be fine with that. But again, this is all through like my own cultural context. It's the year 2021 and I live in the United States of America. This is a story set in the Middle Ages in a fictional country written in the 1990s by a Japanese person. So completely different cultural context, and I don't want to discredit cultures where this sort of thing is deemed acceptable. It's just a bit odd to me, I guess. Not as weird as the cousins thing though. That's still kind of taking the cake here for me. Anyway, I do like this relationship as a platonic one, but unfortunately this conversation is not possible to obtain unless they get married to each other. So, eh, it's a little bit strange, but that's just me, I guess. And that is all the conversations that I think are cool and fun and worth mentioning. There are like maybe 6 or 7 other ones, but they're mostly boring, in my opinion. You can go look them up for yourself, and maybe you'll find something in there that I didn't recognize. I wanted to get all those out of the way at the start so that I could just focus on the story. I wouldn't have to find a good spot to put them in later because the end doesn't really make any sense. Anyway, now we are starting the actual map. And the first obstacle is what the fandom has dubbed the Great Wall of Ada. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a platoon of enemies that are arranged in a vertical wall. There are sleep staves, there are archers, there are magic users, there's tough sword fighters, there's the boss and then also a mini boss with a strong sword. So it's under normal circumstances pretty threatening. The strat for this is really just have Seliph and Ares roll up with their holy weapons that give them resistance boosts, and they can't be put to sleep. The magic users don't do a lot of damage to them, and as long as they dodge enough attacks from the physical enemies, they can just punch their way through the wall and conquer the castle, and then all the other enemies just disappear. So pretty easy if you know what you're doing. But for the most part, if you're going in blind, I can see why that is a problem. There's also some long range magic enemies around your starting position. Fee and Altena and some ranged units can deal with them no problem. Once you capture Ada Castle, they do something here that I assumed was going to happen throughout the map, but it actually only happens here. They talk about the person from Sigurd's army who lived here originally. In this case, it was Claude. And they say that his children are going to be great rulers of this. In this case, those being Lana and Lester. Now, the only reason I made note of this is because I was like, oh, it's really cool how they, as you capture the castles, they're gonna go through like, oh, this is where Lex used to live, or this is where, Tiltu is from, and then Tinny and Arthur are gonna be pretty good rulers of this place or whatever. But they only do it here, which I think is strange. I don't know why they didn't just do it in other places as well, but whatever. At this point, House Dozel is going to go on the move. They split their army in two. One heads towards Chalfie, and the other heads towards Ada. Both groups are pretty easy to take down. One of the enemies has Hellswath, although he's not too much of a threat if you attack him with another holy weapon. At this point, you're also able to visit the only 2 villages in the entire map, the last 2 villages of the game. One of them is only interesting because it reinforces that parallel between Seliph's army and the original Crusaders, which I mentioned got brought up last chapter briefly, and I said that they were going to make it more explicit, and I think they do in like the story dialogue here as well. But I believe this is the first time in the chapter that they mention it, and maybe they don't. I think at this point it's just kind of meant to be like technically subtextual, but like very very obvious that that's what they're going for. So I think that even though it's only brought up a couple times and in completely either throwaway dialogue or optional dialogue, it's still like you get the picture, which is fine. The other village has an old man who sings a song that he describes as an ode to the Crusaders of old, and sings a little bit about Hezul Balmung Hezul Ode and Baldur, who I think are odd choices. Oh, and also Saint Im, who is the one who gets Naga's power. I think those are odd choices since Hezul and Ode have nothing to do with Granvale, and I don't know why he specifically chose to focus on those. It's because they didn't want to go through all 12, and even if he just did the ones that were in Granvale, it would be 7 out of 12, which is still a lot. So I think he just wanted to do the sword ones, and then the big leader who had Naga's book. The real reason that I wrote it down though is because I wanted to bring specific attention to a couple lines in this song that outline a neat idea that is kind of I don't know if I would call it a theme of this game, but it's something that I had a big think about and that I enjoyed having that big think about. He says, "Shall our prayers yield victory, or shall it be death? And yet have no fear, for our battle is a beginning, and defeat is never the end. The flame of light we seek is eternal, undying, never lost, and in all who follow us I shall believe, and in all who bear the light I shall believe." So, what I'm getting from that is basically like, yeah, we're going to pray for you guys to win, but even if we lose, there will always be someone else to take up the torch. And I think that this is kind of, I mean, you could see this as being like they are the ones who took up the torch after Sigurd died. Like he lost and evil was able to reign for a while, but eventually, light and goodness and holiness came back into the world and is now fighting back. And, even if Seliph loses here, eventually there's going to be another uprising. And eventually there's going to be someone else that comes and fights back against the Loftier Empire. And the struggle. And I mean, you could probably you could flip this around too and say that there will always be evil who wants to overpower the light, and it's kind of like an eternal struggle. But he obviously focuses more on the positive aspect, which is that no matter how many times evil comes out on top, eventually there will be victory for the side of good, and we just need to have faith in those who come after us. It's nice. I enjoyed reading that. I'd like to sit down and have a cup of tea with this old man, is what I'm trying to say here. Eventually, you're going to capture Dozel, and Lewin doesn't really have anything to say interesting here other than calling House Dozel a pack of idiots, which I feel like is very disrespectful to Lex and Johavier and any kids Lex might have had, but whatever. We get a lot of exposition here. Lewin confirms that the gods that gave the Crusaders their power were actually dragons. I mentioned this earlier, but it's not mentioned in the story until here. Apparently, when they came from a faraway world, as he says, which I assume is just Arcanea, but it could be a parallel world. I guess it's possible. As we're gonna get into a lot of talk about that stuff with FE7, but we're not there yet. I guess when they came from this other place, they took human forms. He specifically only mentions two. He mentions Naga, who took the form of a little girl, and Salamand, who took the form of an old man. And now I feel like I'm going crazy here, but I feel like this is definitely trying to draw a parallel between Tiki and Bantu, but it couldn't be Tiki and Bantu. First of all, Bantu isn't like I don't think he's a particularly strong dragon. Like I don't think he would be one of the gods that comes over and blesses humanity. And even if it was him, Naga is not Tiki. They're not the same person, I don't think. Unless I'm wrong about that. Maybe I'm wrong. I need to brush up on my Arcanea lore or something. But I'm pretty sure that Tiki and Naga are two completely separate entities. In fact, I think you can recruit both of them in FE12. So probably not Tiki. It could also just be like a reference. Like that's the more likely explanation, I think. I just find it weird that he specifically only called out two. And if you were gonna like I get why he would call out Naga, but then why Salamand specifically in addition to that? I don't know. There's another detail here that I wanted to talk about. Lewin says basically the gods drew their own blood with a scratch to the fingertip and presented it to the warriors. Now, I'm about to talk about lore questions that are first of all completely non-important. Like regardless of the answers to these questions, the story doesn't change. So on the one hand, it doesn't really make that much of a difference, but this detail threw a few things into question for me, and I'm going to try to speculate some answers. So first of all, we found out that Gale went on a journey to try to drink blood of a holy beast. Whether he knew that it was a dragon that he was wanting to get blood from or not is unclear. And it's also unclear exactly what happened and if he succeeded in drinking the blood of the dragon. Now, on the one hand, I think that this actually makes a lot of sense because if we talk about what we mentioned earlier about how the Crusaders and their descendants took on the personalities of, or well, I should say, descendants of the Crusaders took on personalities akin and similar to the original Crusaders, it's entirely possible that these personality traits came from the influence of the blood given to them by the dragons. So, for example, Arvis was kind-hearted and righteous, and Vala was kind-hearted and righteous, but maybe they were both that way because Salamand gave them his blood, and that's what he was like. So if that's the case, then it tracks that if Gale found Loptir, drank his blood somehow, don't even get me started on that, maybe Loptir presented it to him, then it makes sense that he would take on personality traits of Loptir, for example, being, cold-hearted, sadistic, calculating, stuff like that. But the problem with that is that doesn't seem to be what's happening here. It doesn't seem like he was like the Crusaders were not possessed by the dragons. They were given blessings and given power from their blood, but they didn't literally get taken over by the dragons. This Gale person and his descendants seem to have been literally transformed into the dragon Loptir, or like have him in their body, like physically. At the end of the chapter, when you defeat Julius, Loptir gets forced out of his body, and it takes the form of like an actual giant dragon. That also might be a metaphorical representation of what's going on, though, so I don't know. Maybe Loptir just gave him way more blood than the other dragons did. Like maybe Loptir purposefully like gave him like a bucket full of blood, and when you drink that much blood, you take on way more of the traits of the dragon. Maybe the dragon like completely takes over your body or whatever. Who knows? I find this sort of thing interesting, and we're going to talk a lot more about dragon lore as the series goes on because it's fairly consistent, although not entirely so. There's like enough common ground where you can be like, okay, so yeah, the dragons did this and that, and they came from here, and that fits in with what they did in a different game, and they do similar things, act in a certain way. So I'm going to be drawing connections like these a lot, but I'm still kind of like a little lost here on like what actually happened and what made Gale, and by extension Julius, turn into Loptir. My best guess is like I said earlier, Gale probably just drank a lot more blood than the Crusaders did, but who knows. Lewin goes on to say that Loptir is so strong that even if all the other dragons work together, they would still need Naga in order to come in and finish the deal. That's not technically true in gameplay, but I think it's really trying to hammer home like, yeah, if you try to fight Julius without Julia, you're going to have a real tough time. Possible, but difficult. Oh, and then this is also where Lewin explicitly confirms that Julia is Selip's sister, and that she is the descendant of, she received most of Naga's blood. He says something here, again, not entirely relevant, probably just a throwaway line, but it once again gave me a very big think of how, like, what exactly is he talking about here. He says that he only recently learned that Julia is the one who has the power to stop Julius. When did he learn that? Because he didn't know at the beginning of chapter 10. At least it seems like he didn't, unless he was lying, but I'm going to assume that he wasn't. So at some point between chapters 10 and like halfway through Endgame, he figured it out. And I can't imagine, like, I don't know how that would have happened. He didn't go anywhere. Like in the middle of chapter 6, he's like, okay, I need to go do something else. I'll be back later. And if he had done that again in chapter 10, I would have been like, oh, okay, cool. That's, he was figuring that out. That makes sense. But no, he stays with Seliph the whole time. Who told him this? There's a few different possibilities. I mean, the correct answer is that he just he just needed to figure it out for the story to make sense. But he could have talked to someone. There might have been someone like in who was close to Arvis who knew the truth or something like that. That's my best guess. Is he like talked to Paulmark or something and was like, "Hey, what's going on?" And Paulmark told him all this shit. Doesn't really matter though. Now it's time to take on Hilda and also Scorpius. Scorpius is Andre's kid, so Aideen and Bridget's nephew. I guess cousin to would be Fevel, Daisy, or Fevel, Patty, Lester, and Lana. Oh, that Feval and Lana and also Patty and Lester all have lover conversations that don't involve mentioning that they're cousins. Look at that. There's another one. I of course had Tinny with the help of some like leadership stars from Seliph. Just wipe out all of Frege and kill Hilda. Scorpius went down pretty easily too. They were both like pretty tough, but not like crazy. I think I needed a lucky dodge to survive dealing with Scorpius. Anyway, nothing of note really happens between Frege or between Dozel and Frege. So let's just cut straight to conquering Frege, in which you find out Seliph wonders if the children are still okay, because if you remember, there were some children in Militos who got captured and moved to Belhala. Lewin says that they actually found someone who can help them with that, and one of Arvis's old aides shows up and explains that Arvis had the children moved out of Valhalla and into Frege, so they're all safe and protected by Seliph now. And he also reveals, and I have to eat my words here a little bit, although I'll fight back on this in just a second. He says that Ishtar helped them. Ishtar went behind Julius's back and helped the children escape. She says that she worked really hard to make sure that that was a possibility, and yeah, I guess she was just really kind, and everyone loved her, and she was so cool, except for the fact that she was okay. So I'm with this. I've put it paints Ishtar in a new light, and I've gone back and looked at some of the things that she's done that have made me question this, and most of it is called into question and can be looked at with different interpretations that I didn't think about earlier. So my I think there were three reasons why I didn't like Ishtar at first, or why I thought she was just a straight up bad person and didn't deserve this reputation of being like super kind hearted. The first was that when Julius was talking about how much he enjoyed the suffering of mothers whose children were being kidnapped, she kind of just didn't really comment on that or act perturbed in any way. She didn't have like the ellipses or stuttered or anything like that. She kind of just like went along with it. That is probably still the strongest argument for why she's not great, but I think you could argue she's just kind of trying to ignore the problem or something. I don't know. Then when Arvis says, "Hey, give me the kids so we can get them out of Julius's hands," she says she puts up a fight about it. She's like, "No, I don't think we should do that." She's probably just scared of Julius. She might even know that he's nearby. I don't know. And it is most likely in this moment that she decided to help out. And then the third reason is that she was very happy and excited, her dialogue, if she kills one of the members of Seliph's army. Now, this was previously my strongest argument because I think that that's just kind of fucked up no matter how you look at it. Then I did think about it and I realized, yes, Seliph is responsible for the death of her brother and her father at that point. Not yet Hilda. So even if she's a good person and even if she, doesn't approve of the things that Julius is doing, it would still make sense and be reasonable for her to want to get revenge on Seliph and be happy that she's able to strike a blow to him. That's all fine. That's all understandable. So I think there's still a case to be made here that she's not like a perfect angel. And I mean maybe that's part of the point, right? Maybe she's not meant to be. Maybe these guys are hyping her up and secretly in private she's like maybe a little bit morally ambiguous or not. Maybe it's a translator thing or maybe it's just Kaga didn't think about it this hard. Either way, I think it's safe to say that I didn't give her enough credit, and I do apologize to any Ishtar fans out there who took umbrage with what I had to say about her last time. With Frege under their control, Lewin and Seliph discuss how at this point there's really only two places that Julia could be. She's either in Belthamur or in Belhala. Speaking of Ishtar, we see her come out here for the first time. She's talking to Julius, and she says that she wants to go fight the rebels. Julius kind of puts up a fight a little bit, and he's like, "Oh, do you want to escape me? Do you want to get away from me? I think you just want to die and be with her mother, father, and brother again." She denies it and says that she loves him, and there's some ambiguity here about like how she really feels about him. My best guess is that she's, conflicted. She probably does really love him. Maybe they even met and fell in love before he was turned evil, because we don't know exactly when that was. We might actually, I should go back and read some dialogue about it, but fuck it. Or it's also possible because we do know that he's a very charismatic and charming person on the outside and only turns cold and sociopathic when you get to know him better. And it's possible that Ishtar fell in love with his exterior before realizing that on the inside he's just kind of a horrible monster. All these things are possible, and I think it all makes sense. It all fits. Ishtar is probably just not sure exactly what to do. And I think the read that Julius gives of her wanting to basically die so she can be with her family again is a valid one. It's I'm also confused as to like what Julius thinks, and this is kind of my one of my reasonings for why he might still be a little bit not evil under there, because it seems like he got duped here, either duped or purposefully let her go knowing that she wasn't going to come back. And this could go a few different ways. I mean, maybe he knew that what she wanted to do and just didn't care. Maybe he just doesn't give a shit about her and is fine if she dies in like an evil way. That's all well and good, but he seems pretty controlling of her in previous instances, and seems like, like when she gets hurt in chapter 8, he comes and saves her. When she gets hurt in chapter 10, he runs away with her. He's made a concerted effort with her more than anyone else to keep her safe. And it seems a little odd that now, of all times, he would just decide, okay, yeah, you can die, I don't really care. So I think that this is probably the strongest case you have for saying that maybe there's still a little bit of the old Julius left in there. Maybe he is, sympathetic and trying to maybe even like without realizing it, give her what she wants. Or maybe she just got tricked. Maybe she's really convinced him that, like, yes, I'm going to go all out and I'm going to take revenge. And really, she just wanted to die. And maybe he just didn't realize it. Maybe he got fooled. That's also a possibility. Interesting questions. At this point, Julius also deploys the Dead Lords, who you mentioned earlier, these enigmatic generals, I guess, or super soldiers or something. They're very strong enemies that station outside Valhalla, and you need to get past them if you want to get to Julius. And we don't really know anything about them. I mean, we find out some more stuff in Thracia that has some implications, and they also come back in Awakening, although I'm pretty sure that's just a reference and not actually like the real Dead Lords. I don't know. We can talk about that when we get to it, though. All we know about them is that they all have unique names. I'm pretty sure the names are all Latin, but I think they're all just numbers in different languages, or like mostly. Here, let me check this out, because I remember the etymology behind their names meant something, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Okay, so according to the wiki, in the Japanese version, the Dead Lords are named after the first 12 numbers in German. In the English version, they are named after figures of the Chinese zodiac in Latin. So I don't think there's any significance there in terms of their names, but again, they're not really important. We see some more stuff about them in the next game, so we'll talk more about them then. But for right now, all you gotta know is that they're really tough, and you gotta get past them if you want to get to Julius. But even before that, we have other things to worry about. Ishtar sends out a group to attack us as well, and among this group is a trio. Among this group is a trio. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Among this group is a trio of Pegasus Knights who are extremely strong. They have earth swords, they have leg rings, and they have crazy skill sets like Nile, Critical, Adept, and Pursuit. I think they all have those 4 skills. And they can triangle attack you, kind of like the mages in previous chapters, although this chapter they have a much more they're much more likely to do it, basically, because obviously they're a lot more mobile. They are going to attack you at 1 range if they can, unlike the mages, which I believe always attack you at 2 range if they can, as long as you don't counter them. So I actually got caught in a triangle attack here, and I luckily did not die. I did not have to reset that turn, but in dealing with them after that, it was really tough, and I had to reset quite a few times just to get past these guys. Ishtar herself is no joke. I've always kind of talked shit about her because she's always been pretty easy to take down with like Forseti or Mistletoe or something like that. But in this chapter, I don't know if they made her stronger or if I just got lucky in all those previous attempts, but she's tough. She's definitely not easy to take down. It didn't take me that many attempts, at least compared to the Pegasus Knights. Those Pegasus Knights are legitimately maybe the hardest boss in the game that isn't Julius, and that's kind of, I mean, that's not saying a ton. There aren't a lot of super strong bosses, but they're definitely. I mean, counting them as like a unit, like the three of them together, I would say they're probably top five in the game, almost definitely. So they're tricky. He also sends Arion to attack Chalfie with a group of Draco Knights. And at this point, you need to have. Well, I mean, I guess you can kill him, which, I mean, is tough. Again, chapter 9, he really gave us a rough time. But in this chapter, you can either kill him or you can talk to him with Altena, and he will join your group. Not as a playable character, unfortunately. He'd be kind of fun to have as like a Gato character. But no, they just follow Altena around, and personally, they were too far away for them to like do anything or like get into the action at all, especially in regards to dealing with Ishtar and their group, which is where I probably would have liked their help the most. But yeah, they're just green units that follow Altana around. And then the last thing you need to be aware of is that Manfroy is now controlling Julia. He's taken over her mind and has sent her out to fight you. And in order to get her to stop, you need to go and kill Manfroy, who is further away from you than Julius is. And also, Julia is attacking you at the same time. So you need to kind of bait her around. For me, I usually use just Seliph or Ares characters that have high res and won't counterattack her because otherwise she can't die. But yeah, I baited her with I think Ares this time, and I had Seliph go and kill Manfroy. Manfroy goes out like a little bitch. He's not very strong. I mean, I think he has a sleep staff which can take Seliph down if he's not using Tearfing. But otherwise, he's not very threatening. No, that's not true. He has some dark bishops near his castle that will attack you with, I believe it's Hell, the tome that leaves you at 1 HP if it hits you. Not very likely to hit, but if even two of there's like six of them, I think, and if even two of them hit you, you will die. So gotta be careful for that. But Manfroy himself isn't too much of a challenge. Went down pretty easily, and then you just conquer Veltomer. Then you gotta talk to Julia, which again isn't that hard, and she will rejoin your side. In order to get the Book of Naga for her, though, you need to have her go and visit Veltomer. It's a pretty like complicated process. They telegraph everything pretty well, and it's hard to put myself sometimes in the position of like, well, if I didn't know already, would I be able to figure it out? And I mean, I played this game for the first time once. I'm pretty sure I didn't have that spoiled for me, so I was able to figure it out then. It's pretty well telegraphed, I think. But when all's said and done, at the end of the day, if you pull this off, you will have a Julia with the Book of Naga. I actually had her visit the arena a little bit too to get her up to level 20. I had her, I think, at level 17, if I'm not mistaken. And I just wanted her to be a sage so she could, kick some ass. Book of Naga is insane. All of the holy weapons that you can, well, all the holy weapons, period, give you boosts to your stats. Except maybe Valkyria. I don't remember. But Naga gives her probably the biggest stat boost. I think it gives her plus 20 magic, speed, resistance, and defense, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So she is an absolute monster. I had all my guys clear out the Dead Lords, and then Julia is able to pretty much. It's kind of shitty because if you don't get Julia, then Julius is like unfairly hard, like one of the worst final bosses in the series without Julia. But with Julia, he's a pushover. It's like crazy easy. They couldn't really strike a middle ground here. I think it would have been better if just like getting the Book of Naga negated his powers or something like that, so anyone could contribute instead of just having to have Julia do it. But I guess that I get that they wanted this to be like a thematic moment where she takes down her own brother, and Naga triumphs over Loptier once again. Once you beat him, he spits out a shiny Charizard, I mean, that's what it looks like. He yells that Naga has defeated him once again, and then we get a scene of what looks to be him transforming into a dragon and being torn apart. Pretty anticlimactic end, to be completely honest. I mean, I'm of the opinion that Arvis should have been either the final boss or like a member of your team or something, because like Arvis and Manfroy, or sorry, Julius and Manfroy are some of the least interesting villains that the series has ever seen. I think that they're horribly bland, cardboard cutout, boring, unnoteworthy, forgettable villains that don't do anything interesting. And it's not even like they're bad, like their actions don't make sense. You know, they're not like Garen or Nurgle or anything like that, where a lot of the time they just make no sense, to be completely honest. But they're just forgettable. They're boring. And we're gonna talk about this. I mean, I've already talked about like what I consider to be a good villain. If you're interested in that, I went on a whole spiel about it in, I believe, episode 6, the one in chapter 5. I talked all about what I considered to be the elements of a good villain, and there are multiple ways to be a good villain. They don't have to be like scary or super sympathetic or anything like that, but they need to have something, right? And I think a great counterexample for this is Garneth. Garneth is one of the coolest villains in the series for me, even though he's boring in a certain sense. You know, he doesn't have really complex motivations. He's not very charismatic, and he's not, well written in the traditional sense of is he interesting? Is it fun to learn about like why he does the things he does? That's all like a complete bust. But what makes Garneth so fun as a villain and so compelling to me is that he's so competent. He makes some mistakes, right? But they're all generally pretty minor at first, until he like lets it be like a big domino effect. He steals the falchion. I'm getting a bit off topic. We can talk more about this when we talk about the Arcanea games, but I think it's a good comparison, because I think that Manfroy and Julius are boring in the same way that Garneth is, but unlike Garneth, they lacked this killer instinct that made Garneth threatening and intimidating. He gets the falchion, keeps it with him. He doesn't do that stupid thing that villains do a lot of the time, where they let the good guy plot MacGuffin go off and with one of their henchmen, and then the good guy finds it. He keeps it on him, and also has a tome that makes him invincible unless a crazy, unlikely series of events happens to fall perfectly into place. And of course, Marth pulls it off. He also locks Tiki away and puts her under a spell that only one person in the entire world can break, and he has no reason of knowing that Bantu would be able to break the spell. So he knows what he's doing, and by extension, it feels like he's a really, he's got a good head on his shoulders, and for that reason, feels like a real threat. These guys haven't done anything to feel threatening, other than Julius showing up in chapter 10, but we could just get rid of him by killing his girlfriend, and he dips the fuck out of there. Manfroy, the only thing Manfroy has ever done is convince Julius to let the one person who can kick him out of power live instead of killing her off, and then dies. So he doesn't seem like he's all there, to be completely honest. I've already aired my grievances about the Lobtier cult in general, and I've mentioned a few times throughout the story now that I think Manfroy is a complete waste of space. I think that other than needing the pieces to be put in place, he doesn't do anything of note. And that's just not fun. That's just not fun at all. Julius, I love this read that I've created, and I don't want to say that I'm the first person to ever think of this, because I'm sure I'm not, but I've never heard anyone mention this before. This idea that maybe Julius is still in there somewhere, like the old Julius before Loptier took him over. That's an idea that occurred to me that makes him really interesting and compelling. But that's a read enabled by very small moments that could easily be explained with more likely explanations. And to say that he's, this villain who is being torn apart by these two sides of him in conflict with itself, is a stretch at the very least. It's a stretch. So I think that the most generous interpretation is also a pretty unlikely one of Julius. And overall, the only good villain in this story, the only I should say there were two good villains in this story, Arvis and Trevant. Trevant is more of like a tertiary character who dies in chapter 9, and his arc is all good. I wouldn't want to change him at all. But then when he's gone, and then Arvis basically turns into a good guy and dies one chapter before the end. He shows up and dies within the same like 20-minute span for the first time in Gen 2. What are you left with? Nothing. A whole chapter of just boring nothing villains. Ishtar's kind of good, I guess. Hilda is only interesting if you're invested in Tinny as a character, which you might not be. So, not a big fan of the way this game's story wraps up. It's just a big exposition dump and a conflict with villains who don't really aren't really all that engaging to me. So after you conquer Belhala, Seliph Lewin basically congratulates Seliph, and then Seliph is immediately thinking about what he's going to do next, which is a good bit of characterization for him. You know, he's always thinking about, you know, what can he be doing. He can't just rest on his laurels, you know. He's always got to be thinking about what he can do to make the world a better place, even though he's already pretty much accomplished his goal. Lewin tells Seliph that he should create a new world, and it's pretty vague about what they mean by this, but I like to interpret it as Seliph's going to create a world that's even better than the one that existed before the Granville Empire. Because if you think about it, a lot of minor antagonists in Gen 1 were like corrupt nobles who just wanted money or power. And I talked about why I didn't like that very much, and I still stand by that. But I do think it's a little bit better in contrast, like in retrospect, looking at it as that was there to show that the world that Sigurd was in had some serious problems that enabled the rise of this sort of totalitarian dictatorship. And while it felt boring and uninteresting in the moment, and I definitely think they could have created the same effect with a lot less dedicated screen time to these corrupt nobles, it works as a an example of what Seliph is going to like make the world rise above. So that's fine. And Seliph tells him that he's going to be king of Granvale. He has his last goodbyes with all the characters that you still have up to this point. I didn't lose anyone, or rather, I should say that anytime I lost a character, I reset. So I have everyone. These interactions can change a lot depending on who got married to who, and you know certain characters like if they're their substitutes or not. But I'm gonna talk about my version of events because there's like way too many to keep track of if you're talking about every possible combination of marriages. I'm gonna mention the ones that I got and any noteworthy concepts that came up from that. So the first people he says goodbye to are Shannon, Daisy, and Ulster, basically the Isaac group. And Shannon has a conversation with Seliph that I think is really sweet and really characterizes both of them in a great way here at the 11th hour, which is cool. I mean, I already thought Shannon was a great character, one of the best in the game. So this is not like I'm not saying that this is last minute characterization for a character that didn't have any previously. I just think that this is a cute little bow on their relationship so far. And Seliph basically thanks Shannon for being with him all this time, being by his side the whole way. And Shannon says, "Well, yeah, your dad did that for me too, so it was the least I could do to pay it back to him." And he also talks about how he never forgot the day that he let Sigurd down by letting Deirdre get taken. And I mentioned there that I remembered that being like a pivotal moment in his character, and I didn't remember why, and this is it. Because he mentions it here, and I knew I wasn't just pulling that out of nothing. He does mention here that he could never quite forgive himself for that day when Sigurd got taken, or Deirdre got taken, even though he was supposed to be looking out for her, and you know the disappointment and shame that he felt really stuck with him, and he says he'll never forget the day that that happened. So he gets to share a really cute moment with his parents about that, or he gets to share a really cute moment with Shannon about his parents there. He goes on to say, Seliph does, he says that Isaac, to me, Isaac will always be home, which I think is a great line. And again, translation might color the intent a little bit here when you get down to this nitty gritty of the wording. But I find it really interesting that he doesn't say Isaac will always be a home or one of my homes or like home to me. He says that Isaac will always be home, just his home, straight up, which is fascinating to me. And it makes sense. I mean, he was raised there, but he's been this entire time he's been told like you have this legacy that you're entitled to. You're the ruler, you're the rightful heir to Chalfie, and now he's being told that he's going to be the king of the entire country. And yet in this moment with Shannon, he's saying that backwater town. I don't know how backwater it was, but that, that remote town in Isaac where I grew up, that is my home. And in this moment where he's being told that he's going to rule an entire nation, that's a really humbling sentiment, I think, and just gets to the core of Seliph's character. I really came around on Seliph this playthrough. I think that as far as Fire Emblem protagonists go, I've always been very lukewarm on him. But I honestly like him a lot more in this deep read than I was expecting to. I think I kinda like him more than Seliph or Sigurd, I should say, because Sigurd was very reactionary. He was constantly on the back foot and always reacting to things that were happening around him. And his characterization was always pretty minimal. And I think when people talk about liking Sigurd, and I don't want to downplay people who like Sigurd, obviously, I from my perspective at least, when I think about like, oh yeah, I've always thought Sigurd was a pretty cool character. But when I stop and actually think about why I feel that way, it always boils down to he has a lot of interesting things happen to him. And sometimes he reacts to them in a way that is characterful, but he very rarely has moments of genuine characterization that make him stand out in my mind. It's usually just yeah, he's got fucked over a lot and I feel bad for the guy. Um so that might be a bit blasphemous for me to say, but I just, I look at Seliph, who is so consistently characterized as being this humble, modest, forward thinking, proactive, and kind, caring person. And yeah, it's generic, but it's so quaint and wholesome, and I like it a lot. And this moment was really just the cherry on top for me. Like this is like the crowning jewel of his character is this idea that he's been given everything he could ever ask for, and immediately, like this is the first goodbye he says is to this guy, is to Shannon, and he says, "Yeah, well, I may have gotten all this new stuff, all this new territory that I'm in control of now, but that town in Isaac where I lived with you is my home." And that's just beautiful. Mwah, chef's kiss. Gorgeous. I love it. Daisy pretty much says nothing here, and I don't know what it's like if she doesn't get married, but it's a shame. Daisy and Patty are like a couple of the most entertaining characters for sure. Some of their dialogue is hilarious, and it's a shame to see her relegated to just kind of being attached to Shannon here and not even saying anything particularly characterful. But the same goes double for Ulster, and Ulster and Seliph's conversation, I mean, it's pretty. I mean, it's sweet and it's straightforward. He just says, like, I'm going back to Isaac. I'll take good care of everyone, be well, stuff like that. But I was really expecting them to have more of a moment here, considering, to my knowledge, they were like raised together. These guys are like brothers, aren't they? I thought so. But here it's just, it talks like they met like a month ago. It felt a little odd to me. So they head off. The Thracian Peninsula group comes in. He and Leaf just have a cool moment here. Leaf's going off to rebuild the Thracian Peninsula. He's planning on uniting the continent, which I'll get into this in a minute because there's some stuff here that I want to comment on, but we'll talk about. There's a place later where it'll come up better. They just bro out here for a moment. Seliph says, "Our fathers joined together by friendship. I would love for us to continue to be good friends, forever, basically." And Leaf agrees. Nana is going off with him to help him. Altena is also going because she feels like she should help to atone for the sins of her adopted family, I believe is how she puts it. Which got me thinking about how I guess there's one aspect of this game that I don't think I ever really paid much attention to before. And if you had asked me before doing this, my thoughts on this aspect, I probably wouldn't have given the game enough credit here because there's an emphasis here on Altena. Altena was raised in Thracia and raised by Trevant and raised with Arion. And then she found out that she is the heir to Leinster. But that doesn't change who she is in a way that I would have expected it to. She doesn't just go from Team Thracia to Team Leinster all of a sudden. She finds out that her parents were Quan and and Ethlin, and that gets her to join up with Seliph and everything and join up with her brother. But when she's talking about what she's gonna do when she gets back, she's talking about being a representative basically of Thracia, not Leinster. She's talking about how she wants to go back to Thracia to make up for the sins of the Thracian royal family. And I'll get into this. I mean, I guess I won't get into this. I'll just mention it a little bit out of sequence here. Later on, we get an epilogue where it talks about what all the characters ended up doing, and it says that Altena spent a lot of time in Thracia and basically was she loved the soil where she was raised, and pretty much I don't think Leinster comes up in that epilogue bit at all. So that's cool to me. Is this idea that even though she is taking on, she's found out that she's from an entirely different family, but that hasn't changed the fact that she was raised in Thracia for all these years and has formed attachments with all these people like Arion, Charlo, Hannibal, etc., etc. For whatever reason, I was kind of just always under the impression that when she found out about her parents, she was just like, okay, yeah, I guess I'm with Leinster now, and kind of was tacked onto their group. But no, that doesn't seem to be the case, and I like that. Seliph comments that he hopes that Arion will be able to lend his assistance to the reconstruction, and Altana says that she doesn't think that's going to happen at first, but that maybe someday it will. And I don't know what this means because Arion's alive and working with Altana in the recruitment conversation. I guess recruitment conversation is the wrong word, but the conversation that turns them all green. He says that he basically pledges his loyalty to her, and I don't see why he wouldn't just like come back and help rebuild Thracia. I mean, maybe he's I mean, like, there's all sorts of reasons why he wouldn't want to do that, but none of them are like clearly outlined. And if anything, it seemed like he was super on board with the idea of being with Altena and helping her out and doing stuff that would be useful for her. But now she's saying, no, I don't think he's gonna help us, which feels a little odd to me. Then Seliph goes up to Finn and says, "Yo, you have been like the realest of real ones the entire time. You helped my dad, you helped Leaf, you helped me, and you've spent so long just like trying to restore House Leinster to its former glory." And he's just like, "Nah, dude, I'm just a knight. That's what we do." And I cannot get over how fucking cool this guy is. Like, can we just get a Leaf, get some Leaf appreciate or not Leaf, get some Finn appreciation in here? He's just so cool. I love Finn a lot, and it's all stuff that I've already talked about, so I'm not gonna harp on about this, but what a homie, Just the fact that he is able to play such a pivotal role in the events of the game, and at the end of it all is just like I was just doing my job, basically. I just wanted what's best for these people that I've pledged my loyalty to. That's just so fucking cool. He's awesome. And then Hannibal and Charlo come in. They have a cute moment well, Hannibal just says he's going to help out with the reconstruction, and Charlo agrees. But then Charlo has a really cute moment where he just talks about how proud he is of his dad, and how he's like, I may be adopted, but I'm still the son of the great Hannibal of Thracia or something. That reminds me, I should make an apology because there was some wording that I used in the Thracia episode, the chapter 9 episode, that I listened back to that episode and I was like, damn, did I really say that? So I consistently throughout that episode referred to like the fact that he was adopted as him not being Hannibal's quote unquote real son. And that was just kind of like me not really thinking about it, and I'm not going to make a big deal out of this. It was just a slip of the tongue. I just wanted to make it clear that like adopted children are just as real as blood related children. And I know there are some biases against that position, but no, that is completely real, and I apologize if anything I said might have given the incorrect impression about how I feel on that subject. Just wanted to put that out there. And then finally, for this group, Aselo comes in, just talks a little bit about. You actually get some backstory for him about how his parents died in the war, and that's why he hates kings and nobles and all that. It's not particularly noteworthy, but I just thought it was kind of odd that we got some backstory for him here at the 11th hour. Now, I am using that term to mean, like, why now of all times? Why couldn't this have come earlier? I guess the answer is that we don't have support conversations, so when would it have happened? But, you know, whatever. Probably, I guess in his recruitment conversation, right? With because almost every character has a conversation with Seliph or Sigurd after they join your team, so that could have been it. Whatever. They all head out. Ares and Co come in. I guess all the people who are in Augustria. Ares has pretty much resolved his beef with Seliph. I mean, I think he did in the conversation with Nana in chapter 8. But now he just comes in and says, like, I'm super grateful for you. Thank you for everything. And Ares says, no. Or Seliph says, no. I'm just fortunate to have met you in the first place, so thank you. And then he goes on to say that he's going to help rebuild Augustria along with Layla and Diarmid. Diarmid, of course, being Lachesis' child. So he wants to join in and help out as well, since she was so invested in Augustria's success and Eldegon's happiness. And now we have the characters who are staying in Granvale. First up is Lana. I remember saying something in, I believe, chapter 6 about Lana's substitute, Mana. There's an aspect of her character which is on her like wiki page or something that I didn't know, which is that she has a crush on Seliph. Now, it wasn't on Lana's wiki page. So from that, I interpreted it as just like, oh, okay, well, Lana, that's just a quirk of Mana's character, and Lana doesn't have a particular crush on Seliph in any capacity. But the dialogue here definitely seems to imply that she might, especially since she's married here. Oh, that's true, huh? She got married to Ulster. That's kind of weird. They get separated, I guess. Whatever. Um, she says something like, she has to take on the responsibility of inheriting Jungbi, and she says like, "Oh, well, that's fine because I'll get to stay by your side," or something like that. Some of the dialogue she has really implies that she maybe had a thing for Seliph, which I mean is not unusual. They were again kind of raised together in the same way that Larce and Ulster were with Seliph. So it makes sense that they might have developed feelings for each other from that time. This conversation kind of is what I wanted Ulster's to be more like, and I guess Era's, we'll get to her, or Larce's, we'll get to hers in a minute. But they just talk about, how much they've been through together, and talking about how they were raised together and growing up together and all that. I think he also has that relationship with Jarmwood and Lester, but it doesn't come up in any of their conversations either. It's literally just Lana, which is strange to me. Tinny inherits Frege, and what I made note of in this conversation is that Seliph and Tinny are married, and there was no dialogue for that. There was no unique dialogue for that whatsoever. I'm pretty sure that was the case in my original playthrough as well. I don't remember who I married him to there. I think it might have been Lana. Well, I think that that's so silly. You put in like a little bit of dialogue, like, oh, at least I'll be close to you, my love, or something like that. But otherwise, yeah, Tinny's story ends with her going back to her mother's homeland, which I guess is fitting. Yohavir and Larse are together, and they are going to go take over House Dozel. Yohavir, like a lot of the characters before him, decides that he wants to atone for what his family has done. Yeah, I mean, there's not really a whole lot more to it than that. Larse goes with him because they're married, and Seliph's like, basically, take care of yourself and take care of him. And she says, yeah, we'll do. Lester goes to Eda, and their conversation is really mundane, so I'm not even going to bother talking about it. Sed is going to be in charge of Velthamer. He's described as having the hardest job of all, which is fair considering that both Arvis and Julius did a lot of really messed up shit. So he has the difficult prospect of clearing House Velthamer's good name. We also get the name drop of the Fire Emblem here. The Fire Emblem is different in every game. It's usually important to the story. Here it is not even a little bit. It's apparently the crest of House Velthamer, which makes sense because it's like they're the House of Fire, and their sigil would of course be the Fire Emblem. But it's just mentioned so offhandedly here. It's like, damn, why even put it in the game at that point? It's because it needs to be in every game in some capacity. And in the next game, I don't believe they talk about it at all either, because obviously it's just this. And I don't know why the sigil of House Velthamer would come up in Thracia at all, but who knows? Maybe it does. Seliph, now that he knows that Arvis has done some good things, he says that he can't bring himself to hate Arvis anymore, which I think is a pretty fair summation of Arvis's arc up to this point. It's like, yeah, he really fucked up. He did some messed up shit, but at his heart, he wanted what was best for the people of his kingdom, and so probably not the best guy, but you can't really hate him. Although that is pretty staggering maturity coming from Seliph, considering that he is the reason that his father's dead. But Seliph is just kind of a really mature character overall. He had a lot of growing up to do, I guess. Probably my favorite conversation in this chapter is, or in this epilogue, I should say, is between Seliph and Oifi. Oifi comes in and says, "Well, because you're becoming the king and all that, someone needs to watch over Chalfie, and I'm the only one who can do it because I'm the only one who has Balder blood." Seliph kind of like takes a second because he, I guess, forgot about that, and he is at a loss. He's like, "I no, you can't leave. I still need you. You're like a father to me. How could you leave?" But they talk about it and they work it out, and they come to an understanding. It's just a really sweet moment together. I think the Shannon one I like more, but this one's really nice as well. Seliph kind of thanks him for being such a good influence on him, teaching him all about battle and strategy, but also how to be like a kind and caring person, which basically, I mean, I've been talking about how much I like Seliph and how humble he is and how down to earth and reasonable he is, and I guess at the end of the day, that's all thanks to Oifi. So fuck yeah, good job, Oifi. Did a good. You'd be a fantastic dad. Did a good job raising Seliph, especially at like age 18. There's a great piece of characterization for Oifi here, where I believe outside of his conversation with Fee, I think this is the first time this has come up. The fact that Oifi ran. He was ordered to leave by Sigurd as they were making their approach on at the end of chapter 5 towards Arvis, and he puts up a fight about it, but he does it. And all throughout Gen 2, he talks about, how much he loved Sigurd, how loyal he was to him, and how much he wants to see Chalfie and Granvale restored to glory. But here he lets slip and lets the crack show a little bit on how bad he really feels about that moment, instead of insisting that he stay or that he, accompany Sigurd to the very end. He listened to what Sigurd had to say and left. And of course, I think that's being completely unreasonable. Even if it was just him, I think that he was perfectly within his reasonable rights to leave and live to fight another day. But Also, Sigurd was entrusting him with taking care of Seliph, which Oifi did do and did a fantastic job, apparently. So at the end of the day, there's really no one in the world who could possibly fault Oifi for that decision, and yet he still feels that he's a coward for it and lets some cracks show. He actually ends up crying a little bit, and Seliph consoles him, and it's just a really sweet moment between the two. I don't think this has come up before. I think that this is really the first time we get to see this like, yeah, this has really been eating him up. It's been tearing him up inside, and I feel bad for the guy, Like he was just trying to live, trying to survive and take care of lord's um his lord's son. And yet it's been really causing him a lot of grief and heartache. But eventually they do part ways, and the last characters we hear from are the ones who are going to Seliph, those being Arthur and Fee. Arthur has apparently learned that Lewin is his father. I think this is more evidence for, I mean, in case you needed any more, Sed being the Lewin's canonical son, because Sed knows that Lewin is his dad from the start, so this line makes perfect sense. But for this to make sense in the context of it being Arthur, he would have had to find out at some point, and I don't know when he would have. That doesn't really make any sense. But again, we can just assume it happened off screen. Lots of stuff happens. It's like months or even years between chapters sometimes. But anyway, he says, "Yeah, I'm going back to Seliph with Fee and my dad." But then Lewin comes in and says, "Actually, no, you're going to have to rule Seliph by yourself because I'm not coming back with you." He says that Seliph needs a fresh start with a new generation of rulers. And Arthur puts up a fight. He says, "No, we need you to come back with us. Seliph needs you to help rebuild." And Lewin says, "No, I have my own journey that I need to take." And he kind of implies that Arthur knows what it is. And it could be any number of things. I don't know if it necessarily is like Arthur knows the reveal that they're about to get, but it's possible for sure. Arthur ends up giving in and deciding to leave with Fee. Fee gets a little bit here. It's just a cute little exchange. She has a nice moment with Seliph. It's not anything to write home about though. And then it is just Seliph and Lewin. They start talking to each other, and at first it's a pretty normal conversation, but then at some point Seliph shifts into talking about Lewin as if he's not human. He says stuff like, the rest of your kind wouldn't have helped us, but you stood in and you did what you had to do to guide us, and humanity will always be grateful for what you did. And then Lewin dips out, and Seliph reveals that this entire time, Lewin has been Forseti, the original dragon Forseti, who gave that bloodline their blessing. And that's the big reveal. That's the big twist, is that this entire time Lewin's been a dragon. He hasn't been really himself. And the exact details of this are ambiguous at first. You actually need to beat the game a whole bunch of times in order to figure out exactly what happened, but I'll save you the trouble. Essentially, what happens is that Manfroy kills Lewin in the Battle of Valhalla. He just straight up kills him. But he is saved and revived by Forseti. And in this moment, apparently, there was some kind of mind meld, mind transfer, soul combination, or whatever. Even with that, knowing what happened, it's still pretty vague exactly what's going on. And this is the subject in a lot of debate within the community. I'll get into this in a second after I wrap up with the epilogue. There's a lot I want to talk about in this epilogue, and Lewin is probably the big one, but I'll save that for the very end. The only thing of note in this epilogue, in my opinion, comes from the section about Verdane. Verdane is a country that I had some thoughts on in the very beginning, I believe episode 1 and 2, where I talked about them being described as savages or barbarians, and talked about why that might be. I gave some suggestions, and then the game gave me the real answer, which is that they were attacking Granville at some point, and then I threw that into question. I was like, well, they were the king is a really old dude, so how long ago did he come into power? How long ago were these attacks, etc., etc., etc. Basically, there were some interesting implications, to put it nicely, and I gave the game the benefit of the doubt and assumed that the wording was not representing anything unpleasant. I have to imagine that if Jamk had any kids, this would be a different story. However, in the version of events where he did not have any kids, it's pretty fucking wild what actually ends up happening to Verdane. So apparently, after the events of Gen 1, the Empire just left Verdane kind of to its own devices and didn't do anything with it. So, I mean, the entire royal family's dead, and there's no one to restore order there. So, obviously, there's just been a lot of civil war, a lot of strife, and a lot of bandits pillaging everything. And the epilogue describes how Seliph basically goes and brings order and organization back to that country, and that everyone's super thrilled about it, and having a great time clamoring for how, like, it goes in on how happy everyone there is. Like, it mentions it like 4 times. Like, everyone loves the fact that this guy came in and helped everyone get, help Verdane get back onto its feet, basically. And I think that that is the most generous read, right? Is that Seliph comes in and helps organize the country and presumably helps a new royal family get into power so that it can govern itself. What it read like to me, and maybe I've just been like, maybe I'm just being too cynical, but what it comes across like to me is that this nation, which has historically been referred to as barbarians who practice, you know, they're the home of like the remnants of the dark magic cult. They worship nature magic or something, I think. All of their rulers were like evil meatheads and stupid. They were not portrayed in a very flattering light at all. And then they were basically, it said like once they were left to their own devices, the country just fell apart at the seams. They had absolutely no organization or no idea what to do, and presumably just fell apart for 17 years, just in complete chaos. And then Seliph comes in and immediately brings order and prosperity to the country once again. And everyone's so happy about it. And I cannot read this and not think about like imperialism and how certain countries were, basically invaded and annexed. That's the other thing. For all we know, Seliph just annexed the country and made it like a territory of Granville. A very common tactic of countries in the real world to justify invading foreign countries is to say that they are like, especially back in when America was first discovered, the North and South America, and they were populated by like quote unquote savages and people who less civilized than the Europeans or whatever. The Europeans went in and were like, yeah, we're just bringing order and technology and culture to these uncultured places, smiley face, like we're just having a good time. We're just having some good vibes over here. And I cannot take that imagery out of it. And I'm sure that's not intentional. I'm like, Seliph's a good dude. I'm sure that's not what he was doing. But to me, this just feels very tone deaf and very, especially like, I think I wouldn't have thought twice about it if it wasn't so liberal at the beginning about calling them savages. And if you want to talk about like real world parallels, that's another justification for invasion that a lot of countries came up with as well. They attacked us first, so we're gonna like take them over and completely destroy their entire culture and way of life. And that's pretty much what Singer does. And I cannot imagine that that was an intentional scrutiny of that kind of behavior. I don't know a lot about Japan's imperialistic tendencies, but I'm from what I do know, what wasn't great, not a great track record there. But maybe I'm not giving Kaga enough credit. Maybe this was intentional. Maybe he, was trying to make some kind of political comment. I don't know. It's just hard to read it. It's hard to read it as him intentionally doing this, but it's also hard to read it as like not similar. I don't know. It's possible. I'm definitely reading too much into it, but I think that that's the writer's fault for not taking a little bit more care to ensure that such parallels would not be drawn. Because come on, the door's pretty wide open there. Again, I don't know what happens if Jamk has kids. I imagine that they just go and rule over it. It's possible. I don't know. But I didn't like that one bit. It was also something that I wanted to comment on with Leaf tied into this idea that like Leaf is gonna go back to Thracia and everyone's gonna be super happy that he's just combining these two countries into one. Like it's like not at all. It's super. It's looking at this idea of yes, countries that are fighting constantly need to be taken over and combined and organized and structured by like one individual who knows what's best for them. It's looking at that idea completely uncritically. Juan's dream was to unify Thracia, which is only ever portrayed as a good thing, but yet that's so wild to me. I'm going to go ahead and stop talking about this here because this is already a conversation that is a little bit too big for me. One guy, a white American male, cis hetero dude, to comment on. There's a lot here that I am not the most qualified to unpack. I'm not saying that you know a white cis hetero dude can't like do research and get multiple perspectives and comment on something like this, but I'm not that guy. I didn't do any research, so I'm not gonna like try to pretend like I'm some fucking political science major or anything. It just seems weird to me is all I'm trying to say. And if I could pick that out, I'm surprised that it's not like something that people talk about more often because like I said, I'm not something that usually pays attention to these kinds of things. So, whatever. But yeah, that's pretty much it. The rest of this sequence really just restates stuff that was established in the previous one, and then the credits roll and the game is over. We did it. We're done. We're finished. And we're going to spend all of next episode talking about final thoughts and what expectations were met, which were succeeded, and which ones fell short, basically. But for right now, I just want to focus on tying up some loose ends about this map in particular. First of all, I want to talk about Lewin. I said that I would get back to him later. This reveal of Lewin being Forseti is one of the most interesting reveals in the series, if for no other reason than it's one that puts a lot of previous scenes into new contexts and leaves a lot of room for interpretation on what exactly is going on here. So, the question that a lot of people have in regards to this, or I think even just the assumption that a lot of people make, is Lewin was being controlled the whole time. That was not Lewin, that was Forseti. And those are two completely different people. But something that really stuck out to me as I replayed was the fact that honestly, you really couldn't tell, other than the fact that he did some odd things here and there, like he left Aaron, he left his family behind, and kind of went off on his own to do weird things. He had a lot of knowledge of things that he probably wouldn't have otherwise, stuff about Naga and the dragons and all that sort of thing. He pretty much just acted like Lewin, and I think that this is intentional. I definitely think that the writers wanted to leave this ambiguous and kind of leave it up to the player's own interpretation. Where does Lewin end and where does Forseti begin? For my part, I think that they're basically the same person. I kind of already talked about this on how it's entirely possible that the Crusader inheritors are influenced strongly by the personalities of the original dragons and the original Crusaders. So it's possible that Lewin and Force City just had really similar personalities to begin with. But I definitely think that this is much more of a Forsetti kind of subtly and possibly even subconsciously guiding Lewin. Well, no, that's probably not enough. I'd say it's at the absolute most like 50-50, because there's definitely still a lot of stuff in there that is extremely Lewin. And a lot of his motivations are still Lewin's. A lot of his reactions wouldn't make sense coming from Forseti, even if they do have the same personality. For instance, a lot of Lewin's child conversations, he has moments of vulnerability. He cries, he gets angry, and stuff like that. So Lewin is definitely still in there somewhere. And this ties back again to the conversation about Julius. Is it possible that Julius is still a little bit in there as well? And if not, then what's the difference? And there's a lot of possible answers to that question. I'm not really going to get into all of them because I've talked long enough already. But something I find really striking about this whole subplot in this chapter in particular is how tragic it is. Lewin is a great character, and honestly, I talked about how much I like Tinny, and she's still probably my favorite character in the game. Lewin was always my second favorite, but this playthrough closed the gap a lot. And I came away from this thinking that Lewin is an even better character than I already thought he was. So Lewin's whole character arc is about him, in Gen 1, is about him accepting responsibility and realizing that his life isn't just his own, right? He has an obligation to the people in his country, he has an obligation to his mother, and an obligation to his friends and Aaron. And basically, Gen 2 Lewin just throws all of that away. He leaves Seliph again after all the stuff he went through in Chapter 4 that kind of made him resolve to not do that anymore. His mom died, possibly as a result of that, possibly not, it's unclear. Aaron died. Manya was already dead, I guess, but, after that event kind of sobered him up and made him realize that he's not, if he had been there, Manya might not have died. He throws that away and just leaves again. Leaves his newborn children behind. And this is that's really sad, right? Because it's not his fault that he died and that Forseti took over his body. And I'm sure he's grateful for the life that Forseti gave back to him, but I'm sure part of him, whatever part of Lewin is still in control, is very much thinking like, damn, it really sucks that I came so close and really made I resolved to take my life in a new direction, and then all of a sudden this guy comes in and tells me that I basically have to repeat all those same mistakes over again. And that's just a fucking bummer. Or maybe I'm giving Lewin too much credit. Maybe Lewin is kind of relieved about this. Maybe he didn't want that responsibility and he never wanted that responsibility, and this kind of gave him an opportunity to once again relapse into this mindset of, well, it's just going to be someone else's problem, not mine. I don't know. I think both of those are very valid and interesting reads. I don't really know which one that I would go with. Personally, I like Lewin, so I'm inclined to say that it is somewhat out of his hands. Or maybe it's a combination of both, right? Maybe he does really regret what he's doing, but he does feel that it's still the right thing to do because the alternative, what he's actually doing, is going to save the entire world and not just Seliph. So there's a lot of different ways you can interpret this, and I think all of them paint Lewin to be a really interesting and tragic character, and I love that. And especially, it really came to a head here at the end because he basically does exactly what he said he wouldn't do. He tells Arthur, in this case, Arthur said, I guess if you're talking about the canon, he tells Ced, yeah, go take care of it. I'm basically gonna leave Selise again. It's time for the next generation to take over Selise, but that's just the same thing that he did last time. He's pushing off this responsibility onto other people because he doesn't think that he's the right person for the job. But his whole arc in Gen 1 was about coming to terms with that and realizing that he was wrong. And I'm not saying this is a criticism. I think this is great. I think that this is a fantastic direction to take his character in. And like I said, there are a lot of different ways you can read this depending on how much autonomy you think Lewin still has. And all of them really suck and make him, a really sad character that will always be one of my favorites, not just in this game, but also in the entire series, for sure. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to discuss here, but I don't think so. I'm pretty sure that that's everything. So I guess we'll just go ahead and go straight into our map gauntlet here for this episode. And unfortunately, in terms of gameplay, Endgame is really not winning any awards. I think it has some fun moments. I think that when Dozel comes and attacks Chalfie, that's pretty interesting because you got to split up your group. Arion, if you're unprepared for him, can really get the jump on you, and that could be a fun instance. I mean, I think that can soft lock you. I guess like if you don't have a warp staff or a return staff, if you didn't leave anyone behind, then you might just lose the castle and not be able to do anything about it. But at that point, that's kind of just like poor management on your part. And there were actually some really fun engagements with mini bosses. The three Pegasus Knights, Ishtar, Manfroy, giving him his comeuppance was kind of fun, I guess. Some of the like the Hellswath guy, he was kind of fun. So it's definitely not a bad chapter. It's pretty middle of the road, I would say. Well, I don't think it's gonna. I don't think it's running away with the victory here, which means that just like I expected all those months ago, chapter 3 is the best map in FE4 in my opinion. I know a lot of people are going to disagree. I think that there are some people out there who really enjoy I think people like Endgame. I think people have a fun time with chapter 4 maybe. If you're including story into the mix, which I wasn't, then there are some maps like chapter 5, chapter 10 that do a really good job of that. But yeah, chapter 3, my personal favorite map in the game. I pretty much expected that going in. It didn't really it doesn't really surprise me, although a few maps did come close. Like I said, I think chapter 9 is pretty fun, and I didn't remember how much I enjoyed that map until I went back to replay it. So congratulations to chapter 3, and we will file this away. And one day, maybe, if I finish the entire series, then it'll be up in like a tournament bracket or something, I guess. I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. And there's no news, at least no heroes related news, or sorry, at least no non-heroes related news. And I'm not really doing anything particularly noteworthy. I'm watching Evangelion for the first time. That's pretty good. But otherwise, nothing really going on with me. So I think we're going to call it here. And it's going to be a long episode. The raw audio is at 3 hours. And I'm going to go ahead and guess that the editing will bring it down to, I want to say probably 2 hours, 15 minutes. If you're wondering, it's just because I don't talk for long periods of time and just let the recording go. So still going to be a long episode, probably the longest one so far. Next time we are talking about this game as a whole. We're going to go through and I'm going to talk about what I liked about this experience, what I didn't, and what surprised me, what things that I encountered that I wasn't expecting. We'll talk about a few loose ends, a few odds and ends, including clever mode AI. We're going to talk about the ranking system. We're going to talk about a few other things that I haven't really found an opportunity to talk about elsewhere. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Bye, everyone.